Okay, welcome ladies and gentlemen to section 1.4, quadratic equations. We're going to learn the 4 different ways to solve quadratic equations. Some of them are always easier than others, but some of them work better than others. Okay, so let's go ahead and go forward. First of all, let's just define what a quadratic function is, or a quadratic equation. We're not graphing them yet. Okay, so standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. And remember, in order for it to be a quadratic, it must have that x squared. Can't do it if it's not a quadratic. Or that's not a quadratic if there's no x squared there. There are basically 4 different ways to solve algebraically a quadratic equation. First of all, you can factor. You can at times do what's called extracting the roots. You'll see what that means in a few moments. You can complete the square, which is usually not the method unless that's being asked of you. And lastly, if all else fails, you use the quadratic formula. That's kind of our fallback. And again, unless it tells you to specifically use the quadratic formula. So a lot of what you're going to be doing today is solve by factoring, or solve by extracting roots, or solve by completing the square, or solve by using the quadratic formula. So let's start with extracting roots. This is what everybody wants to do, but it's never actually usually the case. So if there is no bx term, that's what I'm talking about here in this bx right here. If there's no bx term in the equation, you can actually do just square root both sides sort of idea. So if I told you that x squared equals 9, you can simply square root both sides. You can extract the roots, and it will tell you that x equals 3 and negative 3. Likewise, this next one, you can actually extract square roots by getting the quadratic piece by itself. So if we add 12 to both sides, we get 4x squared equals 12. If we divide by 4 on both sides, we get x squared equals 3. And if we square root both sides, we get x equals plus and minus radical 3. So notice you get 2 answers. Still always get 2 answers. This is one also, since I have something squared equals to a number, I can square root both sides. And if I square root both sides, I get x minus 3 equals plus and minus radical 7. And in order to get x by itself, I need to add 3 to both sides, and I get x equals 3 plus or minus square root of 7. And notice I don't care what the decimal is. I would much rather prefer it to look really nice like this. All right, moving right along here. So x squared minus 3x minus 10, and now I want to solve this by factoring. If you remember, we're really just looking for x-intercepts, right? It's looking to equal 0. I really hope you guys are good at factoring by now. You guys are in your 4th or 3rd year of high school math. By now we should know how to factor. X squared minus 3x minus 10. I just know that it's going to work like this, especially since it says it will factor. And I'm looking for 2 numbers to multiply together to get 10 and add together to get 3. And I know 5 and 2 are the only ones that work. And then I notice that there's minus 3, which means I need more minus than I have positive. And that tells me that x equals 5 for the first one, whatever makes that 0, and x equals negative 2 for the other one, whatever makes that 0. Okay, let's practice a couple more examples here. Try to factor these before I do. Now, there is a method to solve this one that's a little bit long and drawn out, but what I'd like to have you guys try to do is just do this. Oh, first of all, sorry, I forgot. You can only factor, must be in standard form. Standard form. So you have to subtract 3 first. So you have to get 2x squared plus 9x plus 4 equals 0. Now you can factor. And when I factor a problem like this, I know it's going to look like this, first of all. And I know that since 2 can only be broken up into 2 and 1, that's got to be a 2x and an x. And since everything is positive, I'm going to leave it as plus plus. And then I just need to figure out what works. So in order to figure out what works, I need to know 4 can only break, so 4 is equal to 2 times 2 or 4 times 1. I'm going to plug those numbers in. If I plugged in a 2 here and a 2 here, and I FOILed, I would get 4 and 2, which does not make 9. But I can try 4 and 1. What if I tried 1 here and 4 here? My outers get 8, and my inner gets 1. 8 and 1 make 9. Therefore, this is the correct factoring. Now I can solve x equals -4 for this one. And then this one is if I subtract 1 and divide by 2. So subtract 1, divide by 2, I get -1/2. Now, there's a reason I put this particular problem on here, is it usually kind of throws people a little bit. But here, you still have to factor out the GCF. If I factor out a 3x, I get 2x minus 1. And then you should still get 2 answers here. The first one, if I add 1 and divide by 2, so I add 1 and I divide by 2, I get x equals ½ And the other one is whatever makes this thing 0. And if I plug in 0, I get a 0. Those are your 2 answers. I think I have one more here. Oh, nope, I don't have one more. All right, so continuing to move right along, we have completing the square. So first of all, this is what we want it to make it look like. This is a completed square form. It's also, when we look at graphing, it's also called vertex form. So in completed square form, you have something squared equals a number. So what you're going to do is this. You need to get the quadratic and the linear terms. So what I mean there is if you had 3x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 0, you need to get these things by themselves, the quadratic term and the linear term by itself. So you would have to subtract 1 from both sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to add half of b squared to both sides of the equal sign. So in this case, the b is 2. I'm going to take half of it, which is 1, and square it, which is 1, and I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Well, not really. In this case, there's a 3. When there's a 3, things get ugly. But we're going to kind of pretend that 3 didn't exist, actually. Let's kind of do that. We're not actually doing this example. You can now factor it to x plus and minus, or plus or minus, that number, whatever b over 2 was, quantity squared. You'll see the example as we get going forward here. And then we can extract roots. So we can take the square root of both sides and add or subtract. So let's try 1 or 2 of these. The first one, x squared minus 6x plus 2. So we have to subtract 2 from both sides. Then I know b over 2, b is 6. So 6 over 2 is 3. Squared is 9. So I want to take x squared minus 6x, and I'm going to add 9 here. And I'm going to add, so I'm going to add 9, so this becomes a 7. And notice here we get x minus 3 squared. That's what's b over 2, right? 6 over 2 is 3. And since it's a minus here, it has to be minus here. Equals 7. And we've solved this problem already. We took the square root of both sides, and we added 3. That's completed square form. We're not going to do that one because I don't think we do a lot of the ones where a is not 1. We're going to do the last one. This one's going to be our last one here. We're going to subtract 2 from both sides. We're going to take half of b, so 3 over 2, and we're going to square it, which is 9 over 4. So we're going to add 9/4. And if I add 9/4 to this, you got to remember that negative 2 is equal to negative 8 over 4. So we get negative 8 over 4 plus 9 over 4, which is just positive 1 over 4. Since that's a plus, that's a plus. 3 over 2 is that piece that gets put right in there. And we get this. We can square root both sides, so we get x plus 3/2 equals plus and minus 1/2, because the square root of 1/4 is 1/2. And we're going to subtract 3/2 from both sides. And if I get positive 1/2 minus 3/2 is negative 2/2, which is negative 1. And if I get negative 1/2 minus 3/2 is negative 4/2, which is negative 2. And there's your 2 answers. Okay, last thing for today is the quadratic formula. Now, I just have a statement here for you. You better memorize it already. You are too far along in math now to not have this memorized. I'm going to leave this solving for you. You got to let it equal to 0 first, I will tell you that. So you got to go like this, x squared plus 3x minus 9 equals 0 before you can use quadratic formula. And I'm going to give you the quadratic formula for the last time. So the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so get that in your paper somewhere, memorize it, get it down. Here's your assignment for the day. I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great evening.